Good evening. My name is Chris Eberly. I am hopefully not the forever president of Arundel Bird Club, but still your president of the Bird Club. Looking for a friendly coup to take over. But glad to keep all the momentum going. It's good to see we have a good crowd tonight. It's really good to see everybody here. It was good to hear tales of Christmas bird counts and other birding. And hopefully people have had a chance to get out and see some of the interesting things like slaty-back gull that's been around. Let's see, I guess, Alan and Sue, do you want to give an update on field trips?
I can do that.
We've had, what we've seen, and where we're headed.
So to end last year, our last trip of last year, we'd like to welcome Jim Colotz, because he did a good walk and he led the walk for us, and he's going to lead some more. So we're really pleased to have Jim aboard here with us. They had 28 species. He said it was cloudy and cold, and that the notable sighting was a pileated woodpecker chasing a red-tailed hawk. So I don't know how the hawk did, but pileated was having fun, right, Jim?
That's right. He flew away.
He flew away. January 8th, to our disappointment, the Sandy Thomas Point thing that was going to be done by Sam Miller again this year for us, got canceled. He went over and checked it out. He says there's no ducks, it's rough walking, and he recommended that we cancel it. And so that was a sad moment. On the 9th at Kinder Farm Park, we had 6 people. It was chilly. We had 38 species, 6 folks came. And we had a great showing for our winter birds. I'm sure this was undercounted, but we had 92 white-throated sparrows, 5 fox sparrows, and it looks like that the red shoulders are starting to pair up. We have 2 pairs there, and that's been our history lately, but we found all 4 of them, and it was really interesting. And the Merlin was all over the place. We saw him where he lives, and then we saw him on the other side of the field. So he was moving around. On the 15th, a special thank you to Ross Garrison. He got access to the Crystal Springs Farm private position place. And then he took us on what I called a history guided walk. It was really fun. I looked back a little bit into, like, for example, eBird, and found that this spot was number 8 on the all-time hotspots for Anne Arundel County, with 221 species cited, and Marshall Iliff had 220 of them. So that was interesting. I was wondering what he didn't have. So that was really good. Quiet Waters, Leo did on the 16th. And his notable thing was they had the first gadwall ever reported on eBird for Quiet Waters. So that was kind of a highlight for them.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
I was there and saw it, helped him identify it.
Yeah.
A pair flew into Harness Creek while we were looking at an overlook there. And
Nice.
It hasn't been reported ever. I mean, I made the bird list with Lynn, and we had it starred as probably around there, although never seen there.
Yeah, interesting. Juanita, you've never had one there?
Who?
Juanita, the Tates lead there a couple times a year. So they're there a lot.
Yeah.
Oh,
well,
we haven't seen one there.
We haven't seen any.
yeah, it's not
There aren't
reported.
any ducks around at all now. Are there?
Ducks are really sparse.
I mean, we saw goldeneye, we saw some scalps, we saw buffleheads, of course. We saw lots of wood ducks. We saw like 6 wood ducks flying around all over the place. A loon, you know.
What was the bird? I missed it.
Which one?
The gadwall was the one that.
A pair of gadwalls
Oh,
flew in.
Yeah, because that just seems like great habitat for a gadwall.
oh,
Never was reported.
Wow, that's really interesting. That's great.
So looking ahead, just quickly, we have Bombay Hook, which we talked about earlier in the talk on Saturday. Kinder Farm Park starts off February 6th, the first Sunday of the month. And then Matt Addix on the 13th is going to do a trip for us at Swan Harbor Farm in Harford County. He's done it for us there before, and it's a nice place to go and look for waterfowl. And he's a great kid. He really does a nice job too. He's really good.
Sometime in February.
And that's it.
That's Swan Harbor Farm where that mountain bluebird was a couple
Yep.
years
Yep.
ago, right?
Last
Yeah.
year.
Last year. Okay. I remember going
I
up to
think
see
it
that.
was.
No,
No, I
You
think
know
it was
what?
2
it
years
all
ago.
runs together.
I
doesn't it?
have
Yeah.
no concept of time anymore.
That's because you're retired.
Sure, yeah,
So it's a good thing.
it is. It's a good.
All right, great, thanks. All right, what else do we need to cover here? Well, yeah, next month our speaker is Fred Schaefer, who we were just chatting about. His upcoming book is called Gulls of North America. And I guess if you ordered a pre-release, it might be available at the end of February. And that should be quite an interesting talk. I'm looking forward to that. Then in March, all right, Pamela, I get these confused. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think March is where we have Jacob Marlin from Belize Foundation for Research and Environmental Education. And
That's
then
right. And April is,
we have Jean
yes.
Scarpula there. Gonna talk about shorebirds.
Yay.
So we are gonna cover quite the gamut of good bird stuff here over the next few months with some very good, interesting speakers. No pressure.
she's out here.
And I just looked up the goals of, it's not out till March 22nd.
Well,
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it was going to come out in January, then February, and now I'm going to wait till end of March. Okay.
Okay.
It's
All
out
right.
on the
Well, we'll look
beach.
forward to that. Let's see. Anything else news-wise? Anybody wants to report? You know, it's interesting. This is and we've been doing these meetings virtually for so long. It's just you don't always get that same level of interaction, and I don't always remember what we used to do in the in-person meetings. I hope we can get back to that
Have food.
before it's totally gone from my memory. But yeah. Well,
I actually just want to say, Chris, that thank you for this, because I look forward to these every month, and you've done a wonderful job for keeping this alive for us. And I think the talks they get better and better and better. So it's all good.
well,
Hear,
you
hear.
know, the thing that is liberating about doing Zoom is we can get speakers from anywhere.
Mhm.
As we're going to find out tonight, and in March, Jacob Marlin, I'm not sure if he'll be in Belize or from his other base in Florida, but yeah, another out-of-stater. So that is the one good aspect, that we can sort of expand the pool of potential speakers, and I think that's been a real exciting part of it. I think we're all ready to be able to look each other in the eye, shake a hand, give a hug. But you know, we have to be patient, and that day will come once again. But for now, thanks for your continued support for these programs, and thanks to people like Bill for tonight, and Jean in a couple of months for providing us these very fine programs. Yeah, I look forward to this every month as well. So,
Chris-
yeah,
Chris, I have a short announcement, if you don't mind.
sure. Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Thanks. The 1 month period to object to the transfer of the 100-acre parcel adjacent to the Patuxent Research Refuge will be ending right around January 27th. Since we're getting really close to that time, I would like to suggest that you send your letters asking the Office of Management and Budget to disapprove that recommendation directly to the Secretary of the Office of Management and Budget. It's, her email is online. I have it in my notes, and I've got a draft out to a couple of groups with respect to it. But I think that it's a real danger that within the next few years, if there's no funding in place, that under the that 2016 law, this 100-acre parcel directly adjacent to the refuge might go up for auction. So I would recommend that we send in our disapproval of that recommendation directly to the Office of Management and Budget.
Okay,
I have some follow-up on Ken's comments.
sure. Go ahead,
Um,
Marcia.
A lot of us have been in communication with our congressional delegation, and it's having an effect. We have heard from most of our people in Congress that they support the land going to Patuxent Research Refuge, and they're working on a way to make that happen at no cost to the refuge. And the real issue is NASA has the Public Buildings Reform Board, excuse me, has recommended that the land be sold to the research refuge at fair market value. The refuge doesn't have the money for that. So what we're trying to lobby for is a no-cost transfer. And our Congress people are listening, and so that's a good sign.
Yeah, keep the pressure on.
We're,
And for those
we're
that
hopeful.
and for those that aren't aware, so this is basically what, like 100-acre chunk of property that NASA owns.
Yeah.
That the 2016 law would sort of favor it being sold
It was a
for
business.
development.
It was a business law, and it doesn't work for intragovernment or intergovernment transfers. Its intent was pretty clear in recommending a disapproval of that particular recommendation. One, has no damage and gives the government a time to either finance it or enact special legislation to permit the transfer without a cost.
Okay. And I guess, does somebody have any information? You know, we could send that out to the membership. So Marcia, if you could maybe send it to.
I think it already did.
I think
Remember,
it did.
like a
It
couple
might
weeks
not hurt
ago,
to just go ahead and send it out
Yeah.
again.
I can send that again.
Okay.
I've heard from a lot of people across the state that they have written in, and so there has been a response,
Good.
and it's been good. It's been having an effect, so it's
Yeah.
all good.
All
At
right.
this
Good.
point, we're very hopeful.
All right. Appreciate that update.
Nice piece of land.
Yeah, it'd be a shame to lose some
100
more
acres.
forested land. Yeah. We need all we can get right now.
Because it's right there.
Okay. I am really excited about tonight's talk. Oh, and let me just ask if I think everybody mostly is, but if everybody could mute themselves, just so we don't have any interference during the program tonight. Thank you. I had the pleasure of in my previous job to be able to finagle my way into meetings with the Kirtland's Warbler recovery team in Michigan. And I want to tell you from firsthand experience, my goodness, talk about a success story in the recovery of an endangered species. It was just amazing to experience the process, the partnership, the level of cooperation between public and private entities, and even between government entities, on a scale that I had never seen before. And to get to know the people was just amazing. I had the real good privilege of being able to get up there and visit one of the banding operations. So I actually have a picture of me holding a Kirtland's warbler ready to release it. Just those birds are just pretty amazing. I can remember sitting in meetings and sitting next to Mike Petruka. And we were talking, we affectionately called ourselves psychos. We would talk about Psych. I don't know if anybody here had watched that TV show, Psych. He had a phone case, like it's all in there. And I'm like, oh, you like Psych? Oh my gosh. So we actually stopped paying attention to the meeting for quite a while and started talking about Psych. But it's that kind of thing, people just doing what they do, doing it really well, no egos involved. Let's see, I can show, I think that's there. One of the recovery team meetings that was at Kirtland Community College. They actually are called the Kirtland Warblers. And there was a meeting I was at, and I don't know if that was the one. The coldest temperature I have ever experienced in my life was in Mayo, Michigan in March of the one year at one of those meetings, 16 below zero in March. And yeah, but that's the way it works up there. I got one of my coins, the geocache coins for Kirtland's Warbler. And then of course, Bill Rapai. Come on. There we go. It's hard to get things in here. Let me just unblur my background maybe. But anyhow, this book that he's going to talk about, well, he'll probably have a picture of the cover, hopefully, maybe, I don't know. The Kirtland's Warbler, the story of a bird's fight against extinction and the people who saved it. About 3/4 of the way through it, and it's just, having been in some of these meetings, met these people, it's like I'm there once again, which is really, really cool. In my 20 plus years of working in bird conservation, I still think this is the big success story that I have had the fortune of having just even a very small part in. So Bill is currently executive director of the Kirtland's Warbler Alliance, and that was a nonprofit created to support Kirtland's Warbler conservation. And I could say more, but I don't want to steal any of your thunder. I'm sure you are gonna give us all the rundown of this stuff. Bill, we are so glad to have you here, especially in light of having our first Maryland official record of Kirtland's Warbler not that long ago.
Yes, that must have been very exciting. I'm very jealous. I've never seen a Kirtland's Warbler in the fall, and I would love to have driven down to Baltimore and just to be there. Thank you very much for that incredibly warm welcome. I'm going to share my screen here and get started on the process of the what do you call this? The presentation. There was somebody who said a couple of minutes ago that the presentations just keep getting better and better and better. Well, I'm gonna try and lower the expectations now. Sorry about that. But and Chris, I got to tell you, when you were talking about how the Kirtland's Warbler conservation team used to be the recovery team, now it's the conservation team works. I am so lucky to be part of this. It is an amazing organization. It has set the tone for recovered species, endangered species conservation, now recovered species conservation. And everybody around the country and around the world points to the Kirtland's Warbler conservation team and the recovery team prior to that as being the kind of organization they want to be and have the outcome that we had. So very quickly, I'm not a biologist. I'm a former newspaper guy. I spent time at the Grand Forks Herald in Grand Forks, North Dakota, the Detroit Free Press and the Boston Globe. I'm the president of my local Audubon group here in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. And of course, yes, I'm the executive director of the Kirtland's Warbler Alliance and a lifelong birder. And I'm also the lucky author, as Chris said, of the book, The Kirtland's Warbler, the story of a bird's fight against extinction and the people who saved it, published in 2012 by the University of Michigan Press. When I wrote the book, I anticipated that I would be parachuting in, writing a book, and then kind of leaving things behind and moving on to do other things. And at the last, what I thought would be my last meeting with the Kirtland's Warbler recovery team, Mike Petrushka, the previously before mentioned Mike Petrushka, said, "You're not going anywhere." He said, "The jack pine has a way of calling you back." And he was absolutely right, because here it is almost 10 years later now, and I am still involved with the Kirtland's Warbler. So what does the Kirtland's Warbler Alliance do? Well, our number one job, of course, is to support Kirtland's Warbler conservation and the Kirtland's Warbler conservation team. A good portion of what we do, however, is helping people understand why Kirtland's Warbler conservation has to continue, even though the Kirtland's Warbler is no longer endangered. And we're going to go deep into that in a couple of minutes. Of course, we work with state and federal policy makers and lawmakers to help them understand why this work needs to continue to be supported with federal dollars, although we are working very quickly to try and shift those federal dollars to an endowment so there'll be no more taxpayer funding for Kirtland's Warbler conservation. We believe that there's a real opportunity to help people, particularly in the Kirtland's Warbler conservation, in the Kirtland's Warbler breeding grounds, understand that there are economic benefits, ecotourism, from Kirtland's Warbler conservation. And of course, we act as a watchdog. We keep an eye on the U.S. Forest Service and the Michigan DNR to make sure that they are following through on their commitments to harvest and replant Kirtland's Warbler lands, so that there's always a amount of young habitat for the Kirtland's Warbler to be able to breed in. This is hardly a news flash at this point. Of course, we know that the Kirtland's Warbler is no longer considered endangered. It came off the Endangered Species List in October 2019. However, things have shifted. We haven't just, washed our hands and walked away from this, because there are new challenges and a new goal. Because what we have to do is we have to establish a new model for recovered species conservation. And we're going to dive into that in a couple of minutes. If there's one concept I want everybody to take away this evening, that is the Kirtland's Warbler is a conservation reliant species. It depends on human intervention on its behalf, and will depend on human intervention for as far as we can see into the future. The idea of the of conservation reliant species is a relatively recent concept developed by this gentleman, J. Michael Scott. He has been working with endangered species for the past 40 years, and he came to realize while he was working on the California condor and working to preserve native Hawaiian birds, that about 80% of the species on the endangered species list are there, unfortunately, it would appear, forever. It's a major flaw in how the endangered species list works. The idea from Congress was that it was supposed to be a hand up, but what has happened over the years, the endangered species list has turned into life support for these endangered species. Once they go on the endangered species list, it's very, very, very difficult to get them off. And we are now just beginning to build a new model for recovered species, this public-private partnership that we are hoping to develop that will help not just the Kirtland's Warbler, but many, many other recovered species in the future. So Dr. Scott realized that conservation reliant species continue to require, even after they come off the endangered species list, predator control, parasite control, habitat management, and those things happen as far as we can see, once again, into the future. So as I mentioned, the Endangered Species Act has a major flaw. We know that these species come onto the endangered species list. Getting them off is another issue. So what causes a plant or an animal to be placed on the endangered species list? Well, there are four major factors: habitat loss, which you can point directly to the Florida panther as an example; human persecution, of course, which you can point at the gray wolf; competition from invasive species. You see there a image of the blue pike, which was a Lake Erie endemic subspecies of the walleye. And that was essentially driven to extinction by invasive species in the Great Lakes. And of course, then there are environmental factors that cause those species to take a population nosedive. For the Kirtland's warbler, we can point specifically to two of the fours: habitat loss and invasive species. The impact of invasive species has had a huge impact on Kirtland's warbler. The Kirtland's warbler population will always be small. So this is what the jack pine breeding grounds in northern Michigan looks like. Very similar in Ontario, very similar in Wisconsin. Young jack pine trees with overlapping branches, surrounded by open areas, very scrubby, very open. And once the trees reach a certain height, the Kirtland's warblers will abandon that stand because they like the young jack pine trees with overlapping branches above sandy soil. The birds will build their nest on sandy soil. They want that overlapping branch above it for cover from predators. And as soon as the trees reach about 20 feet high, those bottom branches begin to fall off, and the Kirtland's warbler no longer have cover. Fire is a natural part of this landscape. Fire naturally renewed the landscape, and as more people came into northern Michigan, we've taken fire out of the landscape. And because we've taken fire out of the landscape, the habitat was not able to renew itself. Therefore, we have been producing no natural habitat. So what we have to do is we have to cut great areas of jack pine forests and replant them. Fire is a critical part of the landscape. Everything here is built to burn. Once fire sweeps across the landscape, it burns the tops of the trees. It allows the sunlight to penetrate to the ground, and plants that had been dormant, the sweet ferns, the blueberries, the sedges, all those plants that had been dormant for 30 years spring back to life. It's really an amazing process to watch after a fire. Of course, there's the impact of the brown-headed cowbird. As you know, the cowbird lays its eggs in other birds' nests. It developed its nesting strategy following the bison across the Great Plains. And in the late 19th century, early 20th century, two things happened consecutively. We wiped out the great bison herd, and we cut the great forests of northern Michigan. So once the bison herd was gone, the cowbird was free to wander across the landscape, and they wandered into this new prairie in northern Michigan, and they found a Kirtland's warbler, a bird that they had no experience with the brown-headed cowbird in the past. 1923, Nathan Leopold was the first to identify the threat presented by the cowbird. Some of you may naturally recognize the name Nathan Leopold. Yes, he and his friend Richard Loeb were involved in one of the most notorious and famous murders of the 20th century. And Nathan Leopold became one of the most famous ornithologists in North America. He identified the threat of the Kirtland's warbler from the cowbird. He made a movie of the Kirtland's warbler and its nesting habitat. He presented a paper at the AOU that year, and he became overnight the world's foremost expert on the Kirtland's warbler. The following year, he and Dickie Loeb conspired to kill their young cousin and became the most notorious murderers of the 20th century. Yes. So here we have a picture of 3 Kirtland's warbler eggs in one nest and 1 brown-headed cowbird egg in a nest. And you can see how similar they are. The cowbird actually disguises itself when it comes into a Kirtland's warbler nest. It will lay its own egg, and then it will remove a Kirtland's warbler egg just in case that female Kirtland's warbler comes back and says, wait a minute, I thought I laid 4 eggs and now there are 5 eggs here. So no, the cowbird will remove a Kirtland's warbler egg and dispose of it, just to hide the fact that it's been in that nest. That cowbird egg, as you can see, it's slightly larger. When that young cowbird hatches, it will be larger. It will hatch first. It will demand more food. And at one point, one of the scientists back in the early 1960s estimated that fewer than 1 Kirtland's warbler on average per nest was maturing to fledglinghood. By any model that you could do of population modeling, it was a recipe for disaster. So let's review very quickly how we got to this point. Kirtland's warbler is a uniquely Michigan story. There's a monument in Mayo, Michigan. You can see the Kirtland's warbler monument on the left, and there's a historical marker on the right. That's at the rest area in Grayling, Michigan. And there's a great deal of pride in our state towards the Kirtland's warbler. It inspires passion. This is, Chris mentioned Mike Petrushka a little while ago. This is Mike Petrushka's leg. He has a tattoo, of course, of 2 Kirtland's warblers, and he is a volunteer extraordinaire. Anytime there is a field trip to see a Kirtland's warbler, he's right there. He's ready to take anybody out to see a Kirtland's warbler, and he always guarantees that they will see at least 2 Kirtland's warblers. I hope you were able to get that joke because tattoos, yes. Okay, anyways. So there are Kirtland's warbler tours in northern Michigan. People come from all over the world to see it. Literally, they come from Europe and Asia to see the Kirtland's warbler. And when they see it, they just go crazy. Now, I'll admit this is not northern Michigan. This is actually a picture taken at the biggest week in American birding. And the line behind all those people is Lake Erie. And over there on the brush on the left is 1 Kirtland's warbler, and you can see how that has brought everybody's attention to see the Kirtland's warbler there in northern Ohio. 95% of the population nests in 3 Michigan counties. There are a few birds in northern Michigan, in the UP. There are a few over in Wisconsin, and now there are a few nesting in Ontario. But 95% of the population nests in 3 counties in northern Michigan. The spring migration tends to go a little bit farther east. They'll jump from the Bahamas into Florida and then go north from there. The fall migration tends to go a little bit farther east. The birds will end up in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina before jumping off and flying across the Gulf Stream to the Bahamas. So in some ways, seeing a Kirtland's warbler in Maryland in the fall is not all that surprising because that is much closer to its normal migration range in the fall. So in 1903, there was a major breakthrough in knowledge about the Kirtland's warbler. Until 1903, we knew very, very little about the Kirtland's warbler. In the 19th century, people spread out across North America, learning as much as we could about the flora and fauna of the North American continent. We knew that the Kirtland's warblers were spending their winters in the Bahamas, but we knew nothing about where they were summering. We knew nothing about their breeding grounds. We knew almost everything we need to know about the breeding grounds and wintering grounds of most North American birds, except for the Kirtland's warbler. So it was kind of a bit of a parlor game for people to guess where the Kirtland's warbler, for the ornithologists to guess where the Kirtland's warblers were nesting. Well, a student at the University of Michigan was fishing on the Sable River in northern Michigan. He heard a bird singing a song that he didn't recognize. So how did biologists work back then? Of course, he shot the bird. He brought it back to Ann Arbor and he gave it to Norman Wood, who was a director of the collection at the University of Michigan Museum of Natural History. Norman Wood immediately recognized that this was likely the breeding grounds for the Kirtland's warbler, and he made a trip to northern Michigan to see the Kirtland's warbler. And he dug up and brought back the first Kirtland's warbler nest to the Museum of Natural History at the University of Michigan. That large one that you see there is the first recorded Kirtland's warbler nest. 1931, a lot of more research really begins on Kirtland's warbler, and Lawrence Walkinshaw, a dentist from Battle Creek, starts research on Kirtland's warbler. Surprisingly, 31 was a big year for Walkinshaw because it was also the year he was married, and he and his wife spent their honeymoon in a tent in northern Michigan so that he could get up every morning and band Kirtland's warblers. People would say they would watch Walkinshaw in the bush, watching Kirtland's warblers, literally with blood trickling down his forehead because he had so many bites along his hairline from black flies. But he did nothing to move. He did nothing to swat the flies. He did nothing to chase them away. He absorbed all those black fly bites just to be able to watch the Kirtland's warblers. The males or the females bring food to the young in the nest. Then he would go band the young while they were on the nest. Walkinshaw stepped aside in the 1930s for Jocelyn Van Tyne to begin his research on the Kirtland's warbler. Van Tyne's name is synonymous with excellence in ornithological research. One of the top prizes that had been given out for many years by the AOU was the Van Tyne Prize for Research. And he was extremely structured, very rigorous in everything that he did. And he was going to write the premier book on the Kirtland's warbler. Unfortunately, he died at a very, very young age from heart disease. But working with him closely in the field was this gentleman, Harold Mayfield, a business executive who took all of Van Tyne's notes and turned it into what had been up to that time, before the time that I wrote my book, the definitive book on the Kirtland's warbler. Now, I don't want to say that I've written the definitive book on the Kirtland's warbler. Mayfield essentially took his field notes and he emptied them into a book on the biology of the Kirtland's warbler. And what I did is I documented the recovery of the Kirtland's warbler through the eyes of the people who dedicated themselves to making sure that the Kirtland's warbler did not go extinct. But Harold Mayfield, besides documenting the Kirtland's warbler biology, he did a couple of really important things. He persuaded the state of Michigan to set aside land for nesting. There would always be land in rotation. The trees would be cut down and young trees would be planted so that we would always have enough land for Kirtland's warblers to nest. And in 1951, in a conservation first, he established an annual census. It was the first time that anybody attempted to count every member of a species. And it's fairly easy to do because when you get to northern Michigan and you find young jack pines, you can find Kirtland's warblers nesting there. You get out of your car, you stop and listen, and you are likely to hear Kirtland's warblers. So what the DNR and the Forest Service do is they set up transects through these blocks. People walk transects and they record where they hear the Kirtland's warblers. It's a very rigorous protocol that they have to follow to avoid making sure that they're not counting birds more than once. In 1960s and 70s, unfortunately, the Kirtland's warbler became a symbol of conservation and conflict. In the 1970s, the Michigan DNR demanded that the Michigan National Guard shut down parts of Camp Grayling, the largest military, non-US military base, National Guard base east of the Mississippi in the United States. Now, troops from all over the Midwest come every year to Camp Grayling to train. And the Michigan DNR said, no, sorry, you're shutting down your artillery range and you're shutting down your tank range because the 80% of the Kirtland's warblers were nesting on Camp Grayling. Unfortunately, what the people at Camp Grayling were doing is they were laying out the welcome mat for the Kirtland's warblers. Through their live fire, they were setting fire to the mature jack pines, which was then being replaced by young jack pines. And the Kirtland's were like, hey, we kind of like it here. We've got lots of young jack pine. We're going to stick around here. So you can imagine that the Michigan Department of Military Affairs did not care much for the idea of being told that they could not train troops on their camp. But eventually there was a settlement reached, there was a land swap done, and the Michigan DNR and the Michigan Department of Military Affairs sorted things out. But before they sorted things out, the National Guard gave the Kirtland's warbler a nickname. You know how the military loves to give everything acronyms? Well, they started calling the Kirtland's warbler the FLAW, a feathered lightweight anti-tank weapon. 1980, absolute disaster strikes. The U.S. Forest Service sets a fire to create new habitat for the Kirtland's warbler south of Mayo. Wind shifts, the wind comes up, the fire jumps the highway, and by the end of the day, it has spread across 40,000 acres. It has burned through the town of Mack Lake. One U.S. Forest Service employee was killed. It was an absolute disaster for the Kirtland's warbler. People in the area immediately turned on the Forest Service and the DNR. They did not care. They could not believe that the government would burn these people out of their homes for a bird. But it was a blessing, because in 1980, you can see where the population was on that arrow on the left. And in 1987, when that Mack Lake fire habitat began to kick in, you can see immediately what it did on behalf of the Kirtland's warbler population. The Kirtland's warbler just started growing, and it has been growing ever since. And the Mack Lake fire turned into a giant laboratory for the biologists who were struggling to understand what it took to have habitat for the Kirtland's warbler up into that time. And when the Mack Lake fire rolled around and the population began to grow, people began to say, aha, this is the secret. We need to maintain X amount of acreage, but we don't need to pack in these trees. We need to create habitat that will mimic the randomness of wildfire. We need to have young trees mixed in with old trees, with old deciduous trees, so that the Kirtland's warbler will have this mix of habitat that it wants. So when the Kirtland's warbler reached 1,500 pairs that was required by the 1976 conservation plan, delisting was required by law. But yet we knew that there was this problem, that the Kirtland's warbler couldn't come off the endangered species list because it needed to have this conservation work continue to happen. So the recovery team has shifted to the conservation team. It's no longer about recovery. It's now about looking ahead. Here are members of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Forest Service, the Michigan DNR, the Wisconsin DNR, Canadian Wildlife Services, the Bahamas National Trust, and NGOs like my organization. We are working together to make sure that there's not only enough habitat in northern Michigan, but to expand habitat into Wisconsin and Ontario, and make sure that there's enough habitat and food in the Bahamas so that the birds will leave the Bahamas in good shape, lots of fat on them, so when they come north, they'll be able to have that carryover effect that will make sure they're healthy when they arrive, and they can do a great job of raising their families. We've developed business plans, work plans. We have gone out of our way to help people understand why this conservation work must continue to work. We're spending time in the community, talking, doing coffee shops and small group talks with people, helping them understand, you know, you can understand why people in northern Michigan are saying, why do we need to continue to cut down these beautiful forests for this bird? I have to look at these young, scrubby, ugly forests because this bird's no longer endangered. Why do we need to continue to do that? It's really important that we help people understand why it's important. We're identifying threats from climate change and other threats like insects that are moving into the area and developing mitigation plans. And as I said, we're expanding the breeding range beyond Michigan. We're hoping to spread more Kirtland's warblers into Ontario and Wisconsin. In that way, we're hedging our bet with 95% of the population in 3 counties in northern Michigan. If something terrible were to happen there, who knows what would happen to the population of the Kirtland's warbler. If we can get them to move to the Upper Peninsula and across Lake Ontario into Lake Huron into Ontario and across Lake Michigan into Wisconsin, that would be great. And we're doing a lot of experiments with habitat. We know what the secret sauce is that got us to this point. Now we're going to begin to experiment to do a couple of things to figure out ways that we can do this more efficiently and cheaper. One of the major problems with jack pine is a junk species, essentially. It has very little retail value. So when a big plot, 100 acres, goes up for sale, the U.S. Forest Service and the Michigan DNR will receive bids for those sales at auction. And what they receive from that sale is less than what it takes to replant the Kirtland's warbler nesting areas. So it's more expensive to replant than it is to cut. So you can see that they're doing it at a loss. So we're trying to figure out ways to improve the value of jack pine. Are there new markets out there for jack pine? We're working to experiment with stocking densities. How many stems per acre? If we plant fewer stems per acre, we know that the trees will grow larger and will be of higher value. The question is, if we plant them less densely, will the birds reject that? We're in the process of finding that out right now. We're also talking about lengthening rotation times, extending rotation times from perhaps 50 or 60 years to 70 or 80 years to allow those trees to grow taller. But if we extend the rotation times, that means we have fewer acres in rotation because it's going to be, those rotation times the trees are going to be in mature trees longer. We're experimenting with thinning out stands. We're going in and cutting down every 3rd tree. After the Kirtland's warbler will abandon the stand, we'll go out and we'll remove every 3rd tree. If you take out every 3rd tree, it gives more light and more water, and the trees have to compete less for the limited resources of this very, very unfertile soil. And we're also planting more red pines among the jack pines. The red pines are a much, much higher value tree. So we're sprinkling in more red pines. And the question, of course, is if we sprinkle in more red pines, how will the birds respond? Will they accept the red pines as willing as they are to accept jack pine? So what we have here is an experimental plot that has been set up by the U.S. Forest Service. And you can see that there's a mixture down in the bottom left-hand corner. Let's point out, you can see that there's kind of this pattern there of sort of a lighter green with little diamond shapes or football shapes. That is the old way of planting for the Kirtland's warbler. You plant in an opposing wave so that the waves would leave opening 1 acre openings every few feet. And excuse me, I have a little drink of water here. The Kirtland's warblers like to nest on the edge of those 1 acre openings because those openings provide them with great food, blueberries and insects and all kinds of things that are out there. So they love nesting right on the edge of those openings. So what the Forest Service is doing in that other area is looking to leave areas that are open where the jack pines may naturally regenerate themselves after being cut. And then areas where they are planted either at low or a medium density. And the goal, of course, is to figure out whether the Kirtland's warblers will accept this new experimental area. We're also working on improving the winter habitat in the Bahamas. Initially, ornithologists thought that the Kirtland's warblers would be found in the northern islands in the Bahamas, which are pine dominated, but it turns out that the Kirtland's warblers prefer the islands in the central Bahamas, which are made up of the coppice habitat. You can see that this is what coppice looks like. It's low, scrubby, patchy, a lot like northern Michigan, just no pines. And what we're doing a couple of things with goats, believe it or not. Goats may actually be the savior of the Kirtland's warblers in the Bahamas because, yeah, they're nasty little things, but they eat just about everything. As the coppice habitat grows older, taller trees will then begin to shade out the coppice habitat and the coppice will die back. But if you say to the goats, hey, go get them, they will eat the taller trees and allow the food, those berries that are an important food for the Kirtland's warblers to thrive because they'll be in the open sun. The Kirtland's warblers love sage, wild sage, and torchberry and snowberry. And the goats, not so much. So the goats have become an important ally in the Bahamas for creating new Kirtland's warbler habitat. When I initially set out to write the book, I asked myself, what does this one bird matter? Of course, Aldo Leopold gave us a kind of a conceptual thought about why Kirtland's warblers and everything else matters. And to keep every cog and wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering, of course. So after writing a book on the Kirtland's warblers, I wrote a book on invasive species in the Great Lakes. And every time I learned, every time that we lose a native species in the Great Lakes, it makes the Great Lakes more vulnerable. It makes them more vulnerable to shock. It makes them more vulnerable to new species to come in and have an even bigger impact on the Great Lakes. So this one bird actually plays an important role in the jack pine ecosystem. It helps control the jack pine budworm. It helps control insects. It plays its own little role in making sure that the jack pine ecosystem stays in balance. And without it, who knows what impact that might have on the jack pine ecosystem. I know you're a long way away, but we'd love to have you come up to Northern Michigan for Jack Pine Planting Day on Saturday, May 7th. In a second, I'll provide you with my email. Would love to have you sign up for our quarterly newsletter. You don't necessarily have to join a committee. You're a long way away, and it's probably not best. But if there's another thing that I could get you to remember about the Kirtland's warbler, it's not just about the Kirtland's warbler. It's about the entire jack pine ecosystem. The jack pine outwash plain ecosystem is one of the rarest ecosystems in North America. It is a certain soil type. It's in elevated above Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. So it has these incredible weather areas that you can have frost in northern Michigan in July and August because of the subclimates that are up in northern Michigan. It's just an amazing place. You can go from 30 degrees in the morning to 80 degrees by 10 o'clock. It's just an amazing, amazing ecosystem, an amazing subclimate. But it's about the Kirtland's warbler, but it's about everything else that lives in that ecosystem. Managing that ecosystem is really important. We've taken fire out of the ecosystem. We need to continue to manage it properly. So I'm happy to take some questions. For more information or make a donation, visit kirtlandswarbler.org. Email me if you want to join the newsletter, director@kirtlandswarbler.org. I'd love to hear from you. And I'm happy to take your questions at this point. Thank you once again, Chris, for inviting me. And questions.
Bill, thanks so much. A lot of information, and I know there was a lot you're not even able to cover just in the amount of time we have. The one, actually, if you could stop sharing
Yes, sir.
your screen, then we'll get everybody's face, at least that I can see, if they're on. The one question I have is about the Kirtland Warbler Festival. Is that still going on every year?
It has. It shifted from Mayo. It's now being held in Roscommon. It is a really fun day. It is always the first Saturday, the first full week of June. So it's I can't remember what the date it is this year, but it's come on up.
June
please.
4th.
First
Saturday is June 4.
I think that's the date. So we come on up. We have Kirtland's Warbler tours. Would love to have you. If you've never seen a Kirtland's Warbler, this is a great time to do it. Roscommon is a easy town to get to. It's a quick jump off of I-75, and the Kirtland's Warblers are easy to see and easy to find.
And that's one thing I have not attended yet, is the festival, although I've been there around that time. But yeah, I've heard from a lot of people. And yeah, if you have not seen a Kirtland's and you want to see and hear Kirtland's Warbler, that is the place and the time to go. Anybody have questions for Bill?
I noticed that somebody said Mike Scott also worked for Patuxent. Yes, that's true. He is, I don't know how many, I assume Matt knows him or knows of him. If you've not had a chance to meet Mike Scott, he's a good guy. He's happy to answer questions and share knowledge. Yes, I don't know if he gives presentations on the birds of Hawaii, but he might be a good program sometime in the future.
Yeah, and I have worked with him in the past, specifically on that whole issue of conservation reliant species. And yeah, like you said, he kind of was the person who thought of that concept as being critical to what's missing in the Endangered Species Act. Questions? Come on, people. I know you have questions.
I have a comment.
Yeah, Bobby.
Oh, many years ago, Peter Hannon and a small group of us went up to Michigan and to Grayling to see the Kirtland's Warbler. It was quite an interesting tour. We had a tour by, I guess they were forest rangers, somebody. They were in uniforms. They weren't just in, regular street clothes. But it was kind of fun to go to, I didn't know anything about them. And I went in and see these little scrubby pines. I'm thinking, God, what a place is this? And apparently I didn't have a clue about it. But since then,
you're absolutely right. What a place it is. It is one of the most inhospitable habitats that there is. The soil is extraordinarily poor. It's sandy soil. It has no nutrients whatsoever. It's very limited what grows there. But yet the Kirtland's Warbler and a few other species make their home there, and it's just this really extraordinary place to visit and study, because there's really very few places that are like it. Mm-hmm. So when the Great Glacier 14,000, 12,000 years ago began to pull back, it began to sort the soils. So between the glacial moraines, which is really good quality soil, is all these outwash plains that are just left with sand. And so you drive down a road, you go up a hill, and all of a sudden, boom, it turns into hardwoods. You go down the hill just a few feet, and all of a sudden you hit this glacial outwash plain, and it's nothing but jack pine and Allegheny plum and a few pin oaks. And it's just this extraordinary difference.
And if you've, go ahead, Lynn.
Sorry, I was going to ask a question about whether or not cowbirds were still being controlled.
That's a very good question. I'm glad you brought that up. We actually no longer control cowbirds. We've taken down all the cowbird traps. What has happened in over the past 10 years or so is the population of cowbirds in eastern North America has taken a tumble. We've seen that all across eastern North America, but we have also seen many, many fewer cowbirds in northern Michigan. Now, the question is that because the population has declined, or has the area to the south of where the Kirtland's warblers become, the forests have recovered so much that it's acting as a barrier to the cowbirds? Cowbirds don't like, they love the prairies, and they don't like heavily forested areas. They don't penetrate into a forest much more than a mile. So if you have a heavily forested area, it acts as a barrier, and the cowbirds are not going to be wandering in like they used to. Are there ways that they can find their way? Yeah, they can find their way up I-75 or down some of the side roads or whatever. And there's enough patchiness among the forests that they can fly through and find places to where there are open lands. But the number of cowbirds has fallen significantly. Only one Kirtland's warbler nest last year was predated by the cowbirds. So it has gone from being an incredible problem to not much of a problem at all. It's just been a tremendous change, and it is taken a tremendous burden off the recovery team, financially and manpower wise.
Thank you.
I had a question. If there happened to be something like a devastating hurricane in that small area in the Bahamas where they go in winter, what would they do in terms of relocating, going down there and finding that land gone?
That is a very good question, and that is an answer that we don't have a question that we don't have an answer to, and we don't want necessarily to have an answer to. The good thing about it is the Kirtland's warblers tend not to leave northern Michigan, their nesting areas, until mid to late October. They know not to head down too early. So they're, like some other birds that head south in September, they tend to be late migrating warblers, which has them arriving in the Bahamas past the peak of hurricane season. Could they still encounter a tremendous hurricane? Absolutely, they could. And it's always a risk.
Well, I was sort of wondering if, not that they get caught in the hurricane, but say there's a hurricane before they get there. And so the landscape that they used to go and get their food and shelter for the winter is sort of devastated. Then what are they going to do?
Right. They would shift to other islands. They would hopefully find some other place in the in the Bahamas. They'd either go farther south, Turks and Caicos. They might shift to Florida. They might shift to Cuba, or the Dominican Republic and Haiti. There are different options in the area, but the hurricanes are a blessing in disguise for Kirtland's warblers, because when a hurricane comes in, it will knock down the tall trees, and that will allow that coppice population to recover, that coppice habitat to recover, and that's good for the Kirtland's warbler.
Along those lines, I listened to a Zoom a couple days ago, and there was talk of Disney wanting to build a Disney World kind of theme park on Eleuthera.
Yep.
And how is that progressing? Do you have any idea? Hopefully it'll fall flat on its face, but because there's also a couple of islands mentioned, San Salvador and Cat Island, that were also good areas.
Right. There's no conflict between the Disney and the Kirtland's warblers at this point. Disney is working very closely with the Bahamas National Trust to locate this, and we are actually hoping that Disney will help provide some winter habitat for the Kirtland's warbler. So no conflict whatsoever. Knock on wood.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Lynn Davidson, you just look like you have another question burning there. No. So,
Don't make me start calling on you.
one thing that Mac Lake fire, and I think it was around that time, and having been in bird conservation now for more than 20 years, conservation people, bird biologists, foresters, we're not, we don't know how to communicate with the public necessarily. And that Mac Lake fire, I believe, was kind of a turning point within the Kirtland's Warbler story of understanding. And I believe this is when Dave Case was brought in to help with the messaging and how to interact with the public and how to tell a story, and not just, a story as a cover up, but how to actually message about what is going on. That everybody involved with Kirtland's Warbler up to that point knew what was happening, knew what needed to happen, knew why the fires were important and all that. But then I think this is an important point in conservation in general, is the need to take into account that human dimension, the human element beyond just the conservation story. And I think that Mac Lake fire, in addition to all the, the benefits from, late 1980s when the habitat started coming up, understanding and actually paying people who knew how to do this stuff, who know how to do this stuff, to actually put together the marketing plans, the publicity plans, and the outreach plans, and teaching biologists like us that, hey, we need to talk to the public. We need to say things in a way that resonates with the public and not just us.
Right.
And I think that today, I'm sure, is continuing, and I think the festival is doing a lot of that as well. So what in your role as director of the Kirtland Warbler Alliance, what is the most important thing that you do? It's not necessarily dealing with the biology, it's dealing with the public and the business plan, so to speak.
Exactly. When I wrote the book on the Kirtland's Warbler, I spent time with the biologists, and they started talking about spatial this and temporal that, and every time that happened, my eyes would just roll back in my head. And so after a while, because I'm not a biologist, I became like the translator for biologists. And biologists speak in their own language. You've been in those meetings. We've had people, biologists speak in their language, foresters speak in their language, and sometimes in those meetings, biologists and foresters are talking about the same thing, but they don't understand each other because they're speaking a different language. So one of the critically important things that I do is I try to avoid any of the biology speak when I'm talking to people. And I know I fall into it every now and then. I adopt some of that language, and I have to avoid it. But helping people understand why conservation work has to continue and why we need to build this new model for recovered species is really important. And as you said in your introduction, the Kirtland's Warbler is a success story like no other. And if we can continue that success story, continue to build on it, and help people understand the advantages of creating this new model that will help save taxpayer money, that will help reduce conflict between landowners and government, it could be an absolute win-win all the way around.
Yeah. And another interesting thing, the whole concept of conservation business planning and conservation business plans, I think probably has a lot of its genesis with the Kirtland's Warbler. And I know some of that endowment talk was involving the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And I believe it was what the Keystone Species approach and that program. And I know that there was some good success, but I haven't heard the final or where we are or where you guys are with the whole endowment thing. And
Right,
just being able to have that guaranteed pot of money to be able to do what needs to be done in perpetuity.
right. Our goal is to raise an endowment that will help provide funding for that underground conservation work. We know that it costs more to replant than the state and federal government receives from the auction of those plots. So there's a shortfall there. It's about $500,000 a year. But it's not just getting trees in the ground. It's having money for research to make sure that that kind of research that we need to continue to do, particularly right now on stopover areas, understanding where Kirtland's warblers stop on their migration and what we can do to protect those areas, and make sure that those birds have a safe spot. So there's that kind of funding is critically important. We've raised about $750,000 for the endowment so far. We've got a long way to go, but we're chipping away at it.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, I had hoped to get up there in person when you had that celebration, the recovery celebration, but it just didn't work out. And of course, COVID just messes up everybody's plans
It
for just
has
about
messed up
anything.
everything.
But yeah, it's again, I have appreciated being able to know these, all the people involved with this stuff. And ironically, Carol Bassetti, we got talking early on, when I got connected in with some of this stuff. So she was an undergrad at what was then California State College, now California University of Pennsylvania, when I was an undergrad at Indiana University of Pennsylvania.
Ah.
We both ran cross country, and we found the meet, the one cross country meet that we were both at and participated in. I think it was around 1979. And it's just like, wow, the connections of
Right.
all the different things that you could have connections with. It's just so interesting. And then, I know Carol's involvement with the Kirtland's Warbler from way back when has just been phenomenal as well.
She is a force of nature. And, we have to start looking over the horizon because Carol's not going to be with us forever. She's going to retire someday. She's going to move on someday. And, I don't know how we're going to replace her. The leadership that she provides, the guidance that she provides, the wisdom and the dynamic nature of what she does and how she does it is just irreplaceable. I don't know of anybody who could step in right now and do what she does the way she does it.
Well, I think it's that recruiting for the next generations. And what did Mike say? The Jack Pine just has a way of
Calling you
sucking
back.
calling you back. Yeah. But I think that's, one thing that I've noticed is, people like Pete Mara, then at the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center had a number of grad students, Sarah Rockwell and all these others who, there's a lot of research to be done. And I think just maintaining the level of research and the level, referring not just the amount of activity, but the level of grad students and the professionalism and just the outstanding work that a lot of these grad students continue to do. Hopefully that will be able to continue. And I think providing these research opportunities is going to be important. And I think those will always be there. And hopefully it'll just continue to attract the good people that have been there. And then, involvement with the Bahamas National Trust, I think has just been irreplaceable to assist people like Dave Ewart on the Wintering Grounds and Joe Wonderly and all those. And those are two people who I guess Dave just recently retired.
Yes, he did.
Missed that celebration too, but
And Joe Wonderly retired from the Forest Service, and he's now in Athens. I think he's an adjunct at the University of Georgia. And Matthew Perry said, Bill, wasn't Cam Kepler involved in the Warbler
oh my
research?
gosh,
Yes,
Cam
he
Kepler.
was. He was there before I began to gather information for my book. But there's not a meeting that doesn't go by that somebody does not mention Cam Kepler's name. That's the kind of impact he had on Kirtland's Warbler research. He's very, very highly thought of and is still thought of very fondly.
And that's where I got my master's, was the University of Georgia, and I got to know Cam and Paul Sykes and a bunch of other people who have had some level of involvement with stuff. So yeah, just the names go on, and we need to find those new names.
Yes, we do.
I think they'll come around. Any other questions for Bill? Yeah, I could go on talking about this all night, and I know you probably could too, Bill. But you know, I'll tell you, there's the little reminders, the little geocache coins. I would encourage everybody, and here's the fuzzy book again. It's just a fantastic book. And I can't thank you enough, Bill, for spending the time with us this evening, enlightening us on this. And hopefully we will have some more visitors, some avian visitors in Maryland during migration in the future.
Yes, that's just the wonderful thing about it, is that it's not necessarily the needle in the haystack that it once was.
Yeah.
The population has recovered to the point where it's a pleasant surprise, but it's no longer just an incredible mega rarity.
Yeah. Well, and then now the people have seen one in what I think a lot of people would say is, what? There was a bird that showed up where? Right in earshot of, the interstate there in Baltimore with ball fields and just what you might say is sort of this coppice-like fringe habitat on there. And it stayed up until 2 hours before I got there to try to find it.
Me too.
So yeah, I missed it, but I saw where it was. But yeah, hopefully a lot of us can make a trek up to Michigan and see this bird and hear this bird live and in person. And if you've never been to that part of Michigan, it's just a joy to be there. There are a lot of other good bird species there. And then, after you're there, head over to Sleeping Bear Dunes, or there's another place I forget along the Michigan lakeside that I think I saw and heard more ovenbirds and more ruffed grouse than I've ever had in any one place. So there's a lot of good bird stuff to see in Michigan. I'll put my Pure Michigan plug in for the tourism people there. And just, get to the festival, talk to the people. The people are just great there. Do some fishing, do some rafting on the Osable River. A wonderful place to be.
Yep.
And don't go there when it's really cold in the winter, although that's even
The
cool
birds,
too. So
Yeah,
thanks
don't go
again,
there.
Bill.
Don't go there when it's in the really cold in the winter, he said to a guy who's in Michigan who's really cold in the winter.
Yeah.
But
I
they're
thought,
great birds on the Upper Peninsula.
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Get up to Whitefish Point to the bird observatory there and all
Sault Ste.
kinds of good
Marie.
stuff.
Chris, I have a little bit of perspective though on winter in
Lynn.
Michigan. I spent a couple years reporting in Grand Forks, North Dakota. So winter in Michigan isn't all that cold.
Compared to that, you're right. You're right. Very good. Well, Bill, thank you again so much. I know I've enjoyed it. I think a lot of us have. I think everybody has, and we will post this recording, and I'm sure we will get additional views on that. Thanks for the. I have your email, so if people and we can get your information if people want to get in touch with you for more information and maybe to get up there and take a visit.
Thank you. Night, everybody.
Thanks everybody
Thank you
for
very
being here.
much.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.